Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University.
Welcome my dear friends and students to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University in the Chaitanya studio of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University. Today my dear friends, we discuss with the subject called direct tax and indirect tax, and what are the learning objectives about it. While we are studying that particular subject, that is direct tax and indirect tax or taxation, then these are the learning objectives, my dear friends. The first learning objective is to define taxation and various types, history and background of taxation, objective of tax as well as income tax. That means that you determine what is tax and then determine what is your income tax also there. Then what is the income, then assessment year and financial year, also the assessment year and previous year, then agriculture income, then residential status, then incidence of tax, that is type of incomes, etc. So these are the learning objectives of this particular block 1. Now let us define or discuss the introduction behind or discussion the introduction of the tax. While we are talking about the tax, it has a direct relation with your economic system also, economic policy also. The important aim of the economic policy is to achieve economic growth of the nation, of the country, then equitable distribution of wealth also, and income in the country also, and reduction of the poverty. So basically, while we are structuring the different economic policy for the people of particular nation or particular country, then you have to focus on this also, that what are your expenses and what are your incomes over there. Because if there is a not sufficient income, then definitely you not commit that your all expenses or determine the expenditure. So while we taking into the consideration these aspects, the public finance is mainly related with the methods by which the funds are raised to meet the public expenditure. Now we are very well known about the public expenditure and all. And for that to achieve the goal, public expenditure is estimated first and then attempt it made to find out the ways and the means of financing such required or requirement of public expenditure. These are the financed out of public revenues also. Now the very first basic question, that sir, what are the public revenues? So my dear friend, public revenues includes direct taxes also, indirect taxes also, and profit from the government, commercial undertaking, etc. These are the public revenue. When you have the sufficient revenue, when you have the sufficient public revenue, at that point of time, you make up or you made some public expenditure for the public or for the nation or for the country. So you have to deal with it. And for that, my dear friends, for earning that public revenue, to define it or to definite that public revenue, you have to determine your direct tax and indirect tax in appropriate manner. And the direct and indirect tax is the one sources that easily define or easily come up with your any economic policy or the growth of the nation also. So ultimately, my dear friends, it help to diversification of income from the rich to poor and from the few to the many. So my dear friends, in introduction, the direct tax and indirect tax is and the important the key and the playing the key role in public revenue also and for running a country also. Say for example, my dear friends, if the one nation has a big plan for making the the prestigious and the very renowned the infrastructure over that particular one city, but for making that, there is not insufficient revenue. For that, there is no investor to come up with that. Why we are come with your country? Why we are expanding? So at that point of time, if we have the public revenue in appropriate manner, in sufficient manner, at that point of time, the growth of the company or the growth of the country is the most important. My dear friends, the direct tax and indirect tax not only deals with the nation only. If you making the management of that particular tax in good manner, then definitely the growth of the country will be the increasing, the making a good growth, and the company also make it. So this is all about the introduction to tax. Now define the meaning and definition of taxation. My dear friends, tax is a compulsory payment. Tax is nothing but just a payment to the government also. So my dear friends, a tax is compulsory payment to be made to the government by the public. That means whether it is in a direct method or indirect method, that ultimately the public pay the tax to the government for acquiring the service from the government. It has no relation to the benefits to be derived by the taxpayer. In other words, we can say that there is no direct return to taxpayer for what he pays. Through the public in general derives a common benefit, and thus, my dear friends, tax is compulsory contribution collected by the government to meet the expense of various public functions. And for the public enforcement, it definitely required funds. So my dear friends, here the meaning of tax is in very lucid manner, in layman language, that tax is a compulsory payment to be made to the government by the public. So ultimately, there is no relation to benefit to be derived to the taxpayer, but it is compulsory to meet the expense of various public function. With continuing that, the meaning and definition of tax, there are the various experts define the tax in their particular manner. First expert defines that the essence of a tax, as distinguished from other charges imposed upon a person or persons by the government, is the absence of direct quid pro quo between the taxpayer and the public authority. So here justified that there is a difference between the charge and the functions, and the person has to be to pay the tax to the government. Second expert, the P. Taylor, defines that a compulsory payment to the government without any expectations of direct return in benefit to the taxpayer is known as tax. That means the person, if you earn something, if you have the sufficient income, then you have to pay the tax to the government for acquiring a service from the government or for the efficiently used for the public function and for the public. Third expert, that is Professor Bastable, defines that a tax is a compulsory contribution. My dear friends, the word defines it. First, that is a payment to the government, and here the word defines that contribution of wealth of the person or body of the person for service of public power. That means if you have some wealth, then you have to contribute your wealth to the government for the public welfare. So ultimately you have to pay the tax to the government, and that tax is governed as a public revenue, and on that public revenue it meet up with the public expenditure, and when the public revenue and public expenditure both are the meet up with that particular manner, and then it makes the easy and going through the economic policy, and for that the country may be in the growth, then GDP ultimately in a growing sector, in a growing mode. So tax is an important element. Tax is the key element for the development of the company, for the growth of the country. Fourth expert defines that a tax is a compulsory contribution from a person to the government to defer the expenses incurred in the common interest of all without reference to specific benefits conferred. It's not defined that you have to acquire or you raise that particular benefits over there, but you have to pay some tax to the government for running the government, for the public also. So ultimately, my dear friends, these are the difference. The next, according to one dictionary, defines that a contribution for the support of the government required of a person's group or a business within the domain of that government, that is taxation. That Webster's New Revised University Dictionary defines it, that the contribution for the support of the government required of the person, group or business within the domain of that particular government, that is ultimately the taxation. The Dictionary of the Modern Economics defines that the taxation means compulsory levies on a private individual and organization made by the government to raise the revenue, to finance expense on the public goods and services, and to the control to the volume of private expenditure in the economy. That means, my dear friends, it ultimately defines that for meet up the public expenditure, for meet up that particular public goods and servicing, providing the good services to the people, that you have to earn a revenue. And for that, there is only one option, that you define the public revenue, and public revenue define that the direct tax, indirect tax, and the government commercial undertakings. So ultimately, the major burden on to collect the revenue, that is on the direct and indirect tax. So ultimately, whenever you come up with that the revenue for the public revenue, then definitely you have to evaluate the tax system in an appropriate manner. So ultimately, my dear friends, nutshell, we are talking about that the taxation is the payment to the government from the public. So these are the meaning and definitions of the taxation. Now, my dear friends, in today's session we discuss some characteristics of taxation also. With the help of the defined above the definition, then we may define following or some of the characteristics of the taxation also. A tax is a contribution by individuals as well as an organization to the government to undertake various public activity. My dear friends, the first characteristics defined that if you contribute some money to the government, then definitely it undertakes with some public activities and the public expenditure, and it defines some public goods and services also. So my dear friends, that is ultimate definition that you have to contribute some part of your income to the government for well-being of the public and for public welfare. Second characteristics is, my dear friend, it is compulsory measure and taxpayer cannot refuse to pay taxes. That is, nobody can accept the taxation. Refusal to pay taxes is a crime, and therefore somebody rightly pointed out that there is no excuse for death and income tax. There is one slogan of that. Okay, there is no excuse of the death and income tax. If you earn something, yes, it's a very good for you. It's a very good for the government also. If you earn something, then you have to pay some contribution of your tax, of your income particular, and it comes as a tax. So definitely, my dear friends, this is not that we are come up with that nobody can pay tax. You have to pay tax, whether it is on a direct method or whether it is on the indirect method. My dear friends, we take the simple example that you going to the some shop, like you go to the one a grocery shop and you purchase a packet of a wafer. Then my question is to you that whether you pay tax. Answer is yes or no, my dear friends. Answer is yes, sir. We pay the tax. Sir, how? Sir, in an indirect method. Sir, when we are referring that and when we are referring that particular vapor of that particular wafer, the wrapper of that particular wafer box, in that sir defined that particular price inclusive all taxes. That means, sir, ultimately we pay the tax to the government, but in an indirect method. So my dear friend, there is no excuse for the death and for paying the income tax. The third characteristics is taxes are levied to cover the public expenses incurred by the government in the common public interest, and thus the money required to maintain a law and order, defense, construction and upkeep of the road, etc. That is raised through a tax. While we running with it, at that point of time government think about it that the income tax is sufficient for us for running a country, for the growth of the country, for the development of the country. At that point of time government thinks about it, and then they come up with the new policies and the new taxes, like the road tax also, for the public interest. So ultimately they differing or they dividing that particular expenditure over that particular revenue from that particular sector. just like in a toll plaza. When you are go to the any national highway, at that point of time you have to pay some toll tax over there. So ultimately, for maintaining that particular highway, you pay, and for going to that highway to one place to another place, you pay the tax over there. So ultimately, it's a good definition about the tax. The next important point is of the characteristics is that it is not possible to establish the link between the tax and its benefit to the taxpayer or public. In general, it derives the benefits of money spent by the government, but the taxpayer does not get the direct return or equal to the amount tax paid by him. That means you pay the tax of rupees 1 lakh for that particular assessment year, for financial year. But there is no any responsibility of the government that 1 lakh rupees is ultimately we go up and we spent it from you for you. There is no definition regarding it, or there is no and the lawmaking process over there. You earn something very good, then you pay something to the government. It is termed as a tax, but it is not directly affect to you. That your paid tax is ultimately used only for you. It is for the people of that particular country. So my dear friends, this is the one of the good characteristics derived from the definition. Next characteristics is paying tax means some sacrifices by the taxpayers. Now there is a big question. Sir, I am paying tax to the government. It's a very good for them. But it ultimately, sir, creates as there is a my sacrifice. Yes, I am doing that. So paying tax means some sacrifices by the taxpayer. But my dear friends, while you are the calculating tax, at that point of time government will define the Income Tax Act 1961. At that point of time they define some exemption also and deduction also. Later on we studied it, but ultimately after referring this particular definition, it defines that, sir, it is a sacrifice by the taxpayer. Next characteristics is, my dear friends, that is taxes are levied at a progressive rate. Yes, my dear friends. While the financial bill present in a parliament, at that point of time the rate of tax is defined. If there is a change in the particular rate of tax, then it must include in that financial bill. Next next characteristics is that it helps in the diversification of income from rich to the poor and from a few to the many, as defined by the dictionary. Then tax is one of the important and the major source of the finance to the government. Yes, my dear friends. For public revenue, the tax is a major source of a revenue to the finance to the government. Next is, my dear friends, taxation results in reduction of surplus of income which was otherwise available to the taxpayers, and it may adversely affect the ability to invest, and that's why the different concept of tax planning involved in taxation. Now I discussed that the finance bill present in a parliament, at that point of time the rate of tax are defined over there. Yes, my dear friends, according to the Constitution of India, there is a three main list, that is a union list, state list and concurrent list On that, my dear friends, define it that which tax can be the composite or the complied in which list, and the which government should be the procured it. So my dear friends, this is all about the taxation. In this session, my dear friends, what we learned? We learned first, that is an introduction of taxation, that is economic policy is important. Then we learned the meaning and definition, then different definitions of the different experts. Then according to that definition, we define some of characteristics of that taxation. So this is what we studied in this session. Next is for your homework, that you have to come up with that and solve these long questions. That is, elaborate the characteristics of taxation, and second is to give an introduction to the taxation. That is, you referring the economic policy and all other aspects also. Then short question is that give an meaning of taxation by the any expert also, and the easy manner also. Then define taxation according to the two experts. That means you have to refer that particular 6 or 7 experts definitions. Then first multiple choice question is, which tax a compulsory payment to be made to the government by the public? Then ultimately a tax is a compulsory payment. Then again a dash is contribution by the individual as well as organization to government to undertake various public activity. That is ultimately the tax. But my dear friends, the very basic and fundamental homework to you, that this two multiple choice question define under which person's definition, which expert's definition. So kindly come up with that and solve this particular examples, long questions, short questions and multiple choice questions. So this is all about the today's session. Thank you very much.